Hi there, I'm Dr. Yen and welcome to my channel and that's why. In today's episode, I'm going to be talking about makerspaces with our guest interviewer, Trina Deboree. And she is our makerspace master. She's going to talk about why almost everybody should have makerspaces in their classrooms and even at home to help nurture creativity and innovation in your kids. So thank you for joining me here on That's Why. Our guest speaker, Trina Deboree, and the wonderful things that she does with teaching and also makerspaces. Just a quick background, I actually met Trina when we did STEMCon together about 2 years ago, and I appeared on her podcast. And what I love about working with Trina and being on her podcast is she's such a passionate, heart-centered rebel teacher. It was actually because of the conversations that I had with Trina that we actually, I arrived at, oh, wow, we're not about every teacher. We're about the rebel teachers that are here to make a difference in the world and that are here to make a difference in the world by putting our students first, by loving them, and by being rebelliously loving in the teaching that we do. So it is a great pleasure and a great honor to have Trina here today. So Trina, the stage is yours.
Well, thank you. That's such a sweet, welcoming. So I really appreciate that. And also, I think I cannot take credit for this brilliant idea of yours, but I definitely can say that conversation was a very passionate conversation.
Oh, yeah.
And it was on my podcast, which is One Tired Teacher. And I feel like I might have cried a couple times. Every time that you've been on, I've gotten emotional, and I almost just started crying right now when you were saying that, because I think it's so important. So let me just first say that I have been in education as a teacher, first grade and second grade mainly, for 23, 24 years. And in the last several years, I've been a student support specialist and a media specialist, where this last year I was a media specialist again for my second year. And I'm a creator of content for teachers.
Sorry, I'm
Wow,
recording.
did you hear that? Yep. Okay.
I was like, just in case nothing works, I'm recording, so I apologize. Go ahead.
Yeah,
I'm
no, that's
sorry.
all right. That scared me. Yes, so I create content for teachers, for busy teachers, just to give them a little bit of their time back so that they can put first things first, because I think that's so important. And I mainly focus on primary, first and second grade, with STEM and Makerspace and ELA and science. And so that's mainly what I do. I have a course, I have a few courses, and I have a couple podcasts, and yeah. And I love to have conversations around children and children thinking and learning and discovering and getting teachers excited about this kind of teaching, and also really taking care of ourselves as educators as well, so that we can give back to our students.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Like I said, I'm a big fan of the work that you do. So glad you're here. And I was going to say, so maybe a quick introduction, especially now that this is on my profile. So there's probably a lot of people that don't know. Brief introduction on what makerspaces are and why are they so good for kids?
Okay. So there's varying degrees of what you can do in a makerspace, but essentially it is a space that is created for kids to learn and dream and imagine and create and build and wonder. And it's not made up of any specific kind of material. It can be a variety of things. It's not form or not really defined by the space. Like you could put a makerspace in a closet or in a tub or outside, take it outside. A lot of teachers are like, oh, you can actually move it. And I'm like, yes, it can be on a cart. You can have it in a media center. It can be in a classroom. That's the thing that I think is so important for people to know sometimes, is that we can actually have our own makerspace in our classrooms. It doesn't just have to be in a central location, which I know a lot of schools do it that way. But I think it's important for us to be able to have it in our own space as well, because we're integrating different subjects, and there's opportunities for kids to be building and making. And I think that there's a lot more opportunities probably in our classroom than there is if we are just on a schedule of rotating to a makerspace. But that's basically what it is, and why it's important. It's so important because not only do we get to focus on STEM and STEAM topics, but we also have an opportunity to really help our children embrace learning and even like productive struggle, which I think is so important, where we give them the opportunity to, in a safe place, kind of have discover failure and look at failure as something like a bridge to where we want to go. And it's just another opportunity for us to learn, okay, this way we don't want to do it, we're not going to go this way, we're going to do this. And I've recently heard someone talking about like wanting to fail faster so that you
Oh,
can actually, I thought so
interesting.
too. So it's like, bring on the failure, bring it on, because it just puts me one step closer to what I'm trying to figure out. And I think
Mhm.
when kids see that as something that we can celebrate and something that is okay, and that's part of life, and that's part of getting back up and perseverance and determination, I think the better off we'll all be. I also think it's really important to allow kids the opportunity to practice some of these soft skills or some of these things that we want for our kids to be forever, like as lifelong learners, and not
Yes.
specifically for one grade level or one test or one subject, but as people, as empathetic and cooperative and kind and hardworking and determined, and all these things that I don't feel like we have a huge opportunity in some aspects of our current education systems, and that this is an opportunity for us to put that back in.
Yes. And what I find interesting about it is, you know, um, I've been sitting in like STEM council meetings where they talk about the need for creativity and innovation.
Mm.
And, the fact that, yes, we need this in education. And my comeback to that is, okay, well, when do you ask for
Yeah.
creativity and innovation in the classroom then? Like, where does that occur? Where do you see it? Like, if you're not asking for it and you're not expecting it, it's not going to happen.
Mm-mm.
So to me, when you started talking about maker spaces and things like that, I was like, yes, because this is where kids practice being creative and innovative, and all the soft skills that come with that.
Yes, no, you're right. Because what's happening is we're dictating teachers' schedules so rigidly that they feel like they can't put any creative elements back into their teaching. And it's so far as to say that teachers have to be on the exact same page at the exact same time, which has never made sense to me. I used to
Yeah.
joke with my daughter, actually, because that when she was going through school, it kind of came out that we had to have our essential questions on the left side of the board. And it was like this whole rigid expectation. And I remember thinking and asking my principal, if we do that, what are our kids going to do when they walk into McDonald's and the drinks are not on the left side like they are at Burger King, and they won't know what to do? And so my daughter recently, I can't even remember what it was, but she couldn't figure something out. And I'm like, there you go. This is exactly what I was afraid of. This has already happened. You are a product of this kind of system.
Oh
I'm like, I'm
no.
calling him up right now and telling him I was right. I knew this would happen. So
Oh my
it
gosh.
is, it's a sad situation. And so if we don't allow for these creative moments and these creative opportunities, our kids, they don't know what to do.
Yeah.
I told you I had a story before we jumped on, and
Yeah.
I don't know if this is an appropriate time for that.
No, it's good. Can I just frame it a little
Yep.
bit though,
Mhm.
real quick?
Yes.
So one of the things we say when we say don't know what to do, and it's interesting because last week I was actually doing a live teaching for the workforce workshop. I set it up and I ended it. And we talked about why is it that there's always a question students have of, when am I going to ever use this, right? And the fact that school subjects and content are always so disconnected from, work and real life. And that's really sad.
Yes.
And I think one of the reasons why this happens is because our school system is so focused on delivering content.
Mm-hmm.
And the problem, though, is that the real world and the workforce is about how do we process and get and understand the content that we encounter.
Mm-hmm.
And if we don't give kids those skills, so the metaphor that I share is that it's sort of like teaching kids how to drive. And school has been focused on the manual. It's focused on just memorizing what's in the manual, because driving, it seems like it's so difficult, right? Like nobody, and if anybody who's taught a teenager how to drive, it is very difficult. It's scary. It takes time. But the thing is, if you don't get kids behind the wheel driving, they're never going to learn how to drive.
No.
They can ace a manual, but they're never going to be able to drive.
They actually
and Makerspaces, and what Trina is talking about is really how do we provide opportunities for our kids to drive, and not just once, right? Like, I mean, any of you that have teenagers that teach them how to drive, one time around the block is not going to do it.
No. No, and you have to start in a safe environment like that. My son is an example of that. He was with his dad for a while, and he was like, we'll just get in the car and drive. And my son was terrified, so he didn't do it for a really long time. And I'm like, listen, I am going to take you. This is how we start. We're going to start in a parking lot. We're not going to just jump on the road. Yeah, we're starting in a parking lot. Then we're going to go to this like very not busy neighborhood, and we're going to drive around there. And then when you get more confidence, so I kind of broke it down for him a little bit. And he was like, okay, but because you again have to allow for opportunities for them to fail, and when they are
and not die from it.
And not die, because in a car, your car is wrecked or somebody gets killed. And in this case, that's why you just don't jump in the car and start driving. Like, I've never heard of anything so crazy. And, and it kind of feels the same way for me with Makerspace, because if I expect students to start doing different kinds of experiments or different kinds of, hands-on activities, if they've never had any practice whatsoever, they sometimes do feel kind of lost.
And scary. Like, if they've never done it.
Yes, it's overwhelming. It's intimidating. And if it's a part of their everyday life, it doesn't feel intimidating. I mean, I have sat, and that's what I was saying about the story.
Yeah.
I recently was basically subbing for the engineering teacher. She was out that day. They asked me to cover her class. And so I did. And I had, which was not my favorite. I was a little annoyed at first, but that's okay. So when I got there, what was left was what felt like a craft. Like everybody had to have the same thing in the end. And I was like, we're not doing this. We're totally not doing this. I'm just going to make something up right now on the spot. So I read them a story.
Oh, hang on. So can you explain, because I bet some teachers don't see this. What's the difference between like a craft and what you're talking about? Like
All right. So when we think about, when we have like a challenge or we have an objective, we want kids to come up with this. In this case, I wanted them to come up with a solution to a character's problem, which is more open-ended. There's not an exact answer. But in the thing that I was being asked to do, they were going to make a car, which again, you could phrase as like, a mode of transportation, or you wanted them to, replicate like a model or something. But in this case, they all looked exactly the same with this, the straw that was this size and the two lifesavers. And so when we have a craft, in the end, everybody's looks very similar, if not exactly the same. Yes, exactly. And the kids didn't really have to think. They just had to figure out how to put it together. And that was it. And in this case, I wanted them to actually I wanted them to even recognize what the problem was. So they had to think a little bit more about the story, because it wasn't a super obvious, like, this is the problem. So they had to do a little more thinking. And then they came up with creative solutions to the problem that the character had. So everybody's looked completely different. I mean, it was unbelievable to see all these kids and all of their interpretations of what would solve this character's problem. And so I tied in some literacy, but I also tied in, they really had to do some thinking, and I gave them limited materials. So they didn't have, like, I wanted it to be a little bit more difficult. I wanted it to be kind of challenging. And it was like my third graders, they were they were unbelievable. Like they had all kinds of creative solutions and they could talk about it and they could describe it, and they were comparing, contrasting and revising and things like that. But when fourth grade came along, they were like, I don't know what to do. They were whining and complaining. I'm like, what is happening here? I mean, it was so unbelievable. And I really feel like, because it's such a scripted, like as soon as they hit fourth grade, like that high stakes testing, I mean, it starts in third grade, but it's really intense in fourth grade. And so they are so used to they have these programs where everything looks exactly the same. And they've been doing that for a couple of years now. And they didn't know what to do. They didn't know how to even where to begin. They kind of just sat there frustrated and they didn't know what to say or what to do. It was really heartbreaking.
Oh, and I guess, like comparing this with like the driving metaphor, I mean, I think about like the first time you put a kid behind the wheel and they've never driven. They're so used to everybody else driving for them, right? And the manual is so easy, right? It's just a manual. There's nothing scary about it.
No.
But then when you put them behind the wheel for the very first time and they've never been behind the wheel, that's really like what happens sometimes. Yeah.
You feel like you either slam on the brake or you push on the gas pedal, and yes, I mean, it can lead to some kind of trouble.
Yeah. And it's terrifying for you too, like as a passenger.
Yes, as a passenger, you're right.
Yes. Which I felt years from that.
I know it's scary. It is scary, but if and again, it all comes back to a relationship that you've built with them as well. And I think that there's opportunities when kids are building to build a relationship. I used Makerspace when I was a student sports specialist. I didn't even have one like in our media center. I kind of created a small little corner in my office, and it was a place where kids would come and we would start building with Legos, and we had a box and we would build. Like he decided he wanted to make a house out of this box, and he created all these different things, one of my students, and he ended up talking about his feelings and how he felt about things. And he wasn't talking before that. Like he wasn't sharing. Yeah. I mean, he had a lot of trauma. And so for him to be able to open up, it was in those times where we weren't looking right at each other. I was building, he was building, we were together, and then he would start opening up. And so it was like a catalyst for this conversation that I don't know if it would have existed without a little bit of a distraction and something that he really enjoyed doing. So I started realizing how powerful those kind of moments are. So we weren't specifically working on content per se at that exact moment, but we were working on something that was so much more important.
And I think that's it. The content comes through. Like this was something last week that people were, asking questions about, because something that always comes up is, how do you have time for these things? Because everything is so micromanaged and scripted. And of course, a rebel teacher says, well, you don't. And you spend time with the things that you need to that are important. But the other thing, the argument there is, well, if the whole point is no matter what, when kids are done with school, they have to drive. This is it. Like soft skills being part of our society, we have to drive. And thanks to the pandemic, we see exactly what happens when people can't process the information that's given to them, right? So this is almost not an option. To be able to build a literate society, we have to get people who are able to critically think, to have these soft skills in order to just find a job and to function.
Yes.
But when people say, well, I don't have time for it, it's like, well, then are you really preparing your students then for their career, for the world? If they never get a chance to be behind the driver's seat, when are they ever going to do that?
They don't get a chance to experience it. And they don't find what they're passionate about or what they love, what they're good at. They don't know.
And they don't have the confidence in that.
They don't know what to do when they don't know. What's my step? Because they haven't had enough practice. I feel that way about my 21-year-old. She feels really lost. And I'm thinking about, again, the system that she's gone through. And it's like, wow, that really impacted her in a way where it's difficult. And people have been saying that about millennials. It's difficult to know, like, to get out of that rut, to get out of that. Well, maybe there's a reason for that. Maybe it's because we've had these scripted systems and we haven't given them the opportunity to practice. We took away play, we put more instructional time in, we took away
High
things that
stakes
were important to them.
testing.
Yes, high stakes testing, and it went crazy, and we still did it this year with COVID.
Oh my
Like,
gosh,
we
it's
didn't
ridiculous.
let it go. My state was so proud that we held on to it, and I just it which is embarrassing. It's an embarrassing thing and upsetting, because it's not a fair time to do that. Not to mention the amount of time. And as the media specialist, like, I tested more than I've ever tested in my life. I tested every single grade and every single subject. It was
Yikes.
horrible. I really
I'm
got
so
to the
sorry.
point where I would cry. Sometimes I would cry. I felt like I was being tortured. It's a really hard thing to do.
Yeah. And it doesn't help anything.
No,
It
it doesn't.
doesn't help,
Mm-mm.
and I think that was the part that I was telling people too. It's like, it's an investment of time. If you're investing in these activities where you're expecting them to march through the standards and get through the content, you can, but how much is actually going to help them? How much actually serves them? And I think going back to makerspaces, so a slight change, but I think a lot of people, they see it, they get this. So the question now is, how do you get started on something like this? Like, right? It sounds so intimidating.
Yes.
What's your advice?
Yeah, I say that you start collecting. I think that's one of the first things. You start collecting some of your materials, because I think that's the thing that feels really overwhelming to people, is how I'm going to get all these materials. And I actually have a course, which I told you about. It's Mastering Makerspace. And it talks about, like, your step-by-step guide. But one of the things I talk about within the course, along with lots of different things, is how to collect things, how to collect materials, and not, like, break the bank as far as donations from parents, and things that you've collected in your own family and Facebook groups, and bring your, almost like a, not bring your own device, but bring your own, like, materials. Like, there, I have
Bring
a
your own
letter set.
cardboard.
Yes, bring your own cardboard. Yes, because you never can have too much cardboard. And so you start a little bit at that, or you even start, maybe you completely start with just an activity in response to something, or just a little piece of it. And that's what I was trying to do with my Makerspace Moments in Literature. I'm like, okay, I'm going to give you all the standards, literacy standards that you need for a close reading activity. But then I want to give them the opportunity to come up with solutions to the problem. And so it becomes a more hands-on activity. And I feel like sometimes you're fighting against admin, which is really upsetting. But okay, here's all the standards I covered, and this is what I'm covering with this. So you're just starting in that really small way. And maybe that's even just things that you bring out for that particular activity. So people say they don't have enough space, or they don't have enough room. And again, it can be in a closet, it can be in a tub, it can be in a cart. It doesn't have to take up the whole entire classroom, or the whole entire anything. And so I would say, start small so that you don't feel completely overwhelmed. Start with gathering materials. I mean, I started collecting toilet paper rolls, and now I still, in my bathroom, have this huge thing of where I just keep putting them, and I keep forgetting to take them to school. And so it's just stacking up in my bathroom. And I'm like, oh my goodness. And it's kind of, you realize how much you use yourself, and then you're like, oh my goodness. But it's just really beginning. It's starting somewhere so that you feel like you're making a move towards it. And there's lots of different places that you can get things. Donations, going to local business partners and asking them for things. Home Depot, those kinds of places will give you things. And
it's okay. Like, you can go to these places, ask for the manager, and be like, I'm building a makerspace for my classroom of, second grade students, and I'm just looking for raw materials.
Yes.
People are more than happy to help you. You may have to bring a truck,
Yes,
because they'll probably have a lot of things
you
for you.
really might have to bring a truck. I mean, and I mean, and some things right now obviously are a little bit more difficult. Like I was able to get a ton of wood. Now I haven't been able to get wood as easily because it's
Oh,
so expensive. So, and
yeah,
prices have risen, but there's so many other kinds of materials.
yeah.
I actually enjoyed when this part of being virtual, that when I would create like a challenge and they would have to find the things in their house and they would get
I
really
love
creative
that.
in their own home. As far as it made me feel like, I know this will make me sound so old, but that show MacGyver, where he would
I
just come up with
love
these
MacGyver.
very innovative things in
Yeah.
order to like put something together. And you don't know what's in someone else's house. So it was just really interesting, the things that the students would come up with. I thought that part was fun.
Oh, and I'm monitoring chat too. So BB mentioned, she's like, I'm planning to revamp my STEAM course and focus on SEL benefits of makerspaces. So Trina, you just did a session on that.
Oh, awesome. Yeah, that's actually in my course too, but I actually I did a little tweak for it for another conference. But I think this is one of the things that one of my favorite parts of Makerspace is that you have the opportunity to really work on those social and emotional elements. And like I said earlier with that one student, I almost just said his name, where we had a chance to talk and he actually spoke more because of what we were doing and building. But I think one really good way to incorporate makerspace as well as social and emotional learning is if you offer a soft start. And sometimes people have or are like, what's the soft start? Instead of going into the classroom and having bell work on the desk and the kids are ready to get going, which is definitely what I mean, I did that as a teacher. But this allows kids to kind of acclimate to the day. So they come in and they have a choice. There's like offering them some choices. And one of them might be in your makerspace or in your Lego section or in, those kind of things where they can build. And you don't have to give them a forever, but you give them a certain amount of time where they can just come in and they can do things like that and they can build. You might even have a challenge. It could be in response to a story. It could be in response to, something that you were working on in science. And then they have the opportunity to choose some different things and then they can acclimate to the day rather than just come right in and I mean, I know I need that. When I get there, I have to get all my stuff situated. I want to read my
Yeah.
email. I don't want to be on duty yet until I've had a chance. So I come in early. So I have a chance to kind of get settled. And I think that some kids feel this way too. And I realized as a student support specialist, when I was having to go, get kids out of classes because teachers were calling and they were, they had flipped the desk over right away, first thing in the morning. I'm like, this kind of soft start would have made
Oh,
all the
yeah.
world of difference for this
Oh
student.
my gosh, I love that.
I
Because
think it can
yeah,
be
it's
really
like me and
powerful.
my coffee,
Yes,
like
yes,
first thing in the morning, nobody disturb me until
yes,
I've had my first cup.
yes.
Like
Yeah,
that
give
makes
me
a
a
lot of
chance to
sense.
warm up to, and I think that can be a really helpful way for kids. Another
Love it.
way to incorporate makerspace with social and emotional learning is really around great literature. One of my favorite books, and it's behind me, I don't know if you can see it. It's called What the Road Said.
Ooh, what the
Oh my
road
goodness,
said.
so good. It is so, so good. And when we are built, and that's not even the one that I'm thinking of as far as like that,
Mm.
but I got a little distracted. But when we're creating challenges or we're creating responses to literature, that's a great way for us to get in, talking about empathy and talking about, like, I have a challenge for a Mo Willems, um, who wrote the Piggy and Gerald books. And one of them is Can I
Mm.
Play Too? I think it's Can I Play Too or Can I Play Too? Something like that. And it's,
Yeah.
they have the two characters that are playing ball and then this snake that wants to play as well, but Snake doesn't have any arms. But it's a great way for us to talk about what happens when friends don't have, they have limitations, or they like, what can we do to help everyone feel included? And so they will come up with solutions for Snake's arms. Like some people made mechanical arms for
Oh my
Snake.
gosh.
Yes. And some people made like a big net so that he could put it in his mouth and catch the ball. And it was like all these different ideas that I didn't think of, that, little people thought of in order to solve this problem. But it also spurred this conversation about, being inclusive and being aware that everybody has differences, and what can we do around
Joe
that?
asked, what was the book called?
The book that I just said about
Yeah.
the Makerspace. I think it's Can I Play Too? It's by Mo Willems. It's very simple. I actually did it with kindergarten, but I also did it with fifth graders because one day we were testing Forever in the Media Center and I had just created these Piggy and Gerald Makerspace challenge cards. And I was like, I want to try them out with kids. And I had fifth grade. So I was like, okay. And they were so adorable. First of all, I couldn't believe that they would listen to those stories that are really popular in, younger grades. But they loved it. I just think we forget sometimes we need to still do read alouds to our fifth grade.
Yes.
And
I even did
yeah,
this to my high school kids. They
yes,
loved it,
yes, they loved it. And the book that I said earlier was What the Road Said. I'm gonna pull it out. I had to put it my E there. It's Cleo Wade. I don't know. It's beautiful. My daughter actually gave it to me. And then she wrote some sticky notes in it. It's just it's a beautiful book.
Love it. And let me just catch up on comments really quickly here. Okay. I'll read them through and then we can go down because I just want to make sure everybody, Okay. So let's see. Any recommendations for summer reading about makerspaces and SEL? And then, they said, my garage runneth over with paper towel rolls, plastic bottle caps, and water bottles.
Absolutely.
I feel your pain.
Yeah. It comes a point where you have to transfer it to the school.
Yeah. And then Joe he was one of my former students. I love him to death. And he's like, didn't know what a makerspace was and had to Google it. Makerspace seems like a really good way to ease younger kids into the school day. It totally is. It's like, to me, it's one of those magic. It's one of those magic like pieces as a teacher that you want to have just because they're so empowering. They're empowering in so many ways. And when you can empower kids, when kids feel empowered, that's one of the big ways you can motivate them, is because they feel like they can do things. They have a choice on what they want to do. And, they're able to create with their hands and things like that. So,
and sometimes I think it's important to have specific kinds of challenges so that they have a task. But then other times I think it's important for them to have like free choice, because that's sometimes where you will realize that kids are like, I don't know what to do. I can't know what to do. And like the whole I'm bored thing. I don't know if kids know how to be bored anymore. Like they have such instant gratification that I think they need to learn to figure out what to do when they're not feeling stimulated. Like, what can I do? And I just think there's so many things in a makerspace that it's hard to say that. I don't think I've ever had a student tell me they were bored.
Right, because there's so many different things that they can do and create. Phoebe says, I love your idea for using that book. I can see using that to talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion. Absolutely. Yeah. And Joseph asks, how many times do you usually allocate to Makerspace in the morning? What's a good number? How much time do you allocate?
So I didn't get to do it in my classroom. And, I said, I had bell work on the desk, and I'm not proud to say that, but this was, 6 or 7 years ago. Now I've been out of the classroom as a student support specialist and a media specialist, but I know that this was something I would do. And I actually have thought about it. What would be realistic? And I actually think at least 15 minutes. I mean, it's all that time that you have yourself where you have to take attendance, and people are turning in planners, and kids have got to go to the bathroom and sharpen their pencils, and all those kinds of warm-up activities as far as primary or elementary school kids go. And if that feels like too much, then do it for 10 minutes. I don't think it's too much. I think that it takes us just that long to get ourselves situated with our classes.
Yes.
And the whole bell to bell instruction, that doesn't, we're still, again, if you're using a challenge or using some STEM related activity, they are doing bell to bell instruction. It just looks different than what some people would say is like, okay, get them to work. You are getting them to work. You're just getting them to work in a completely different way. And it will open up to so much more that they will be willing and want to do because they had those few moments to kind of gather themselves.
Yeah. I was even thinking, as you said that, like some of those open-ended things could be like, you have 15 minutes to make a thing.
Yes.
You know,
Yes.
just make a thing, you know, and doesn't have to be anything. Just make a thing for 15
Just make a
minutes.
thing
And
for 15 minutes.
right.
Yeah.
And, you know, Joseph here says, oh, that's a good idea. So kind of like get your brain ready time for everyone while taking role and such.
Yes.
Absolutely. And BB says, I noticed a difference in student engagement when I started my day with choice time. Yeah.
Yeah, I think
Yeah, I
choice
bet.
time, I think it's so important. And we know that brain research says that we should be allowing kids to have choices. And yet we often don't. We often get kind of rigid in our, well, I'm going to control my schedule, so it's got to be exactly like this. It doesn't have to be. I think allowing choice when we can allow choice is huge. And I think we need to
Yes.
do it. I think we need to push ourselves. I mean, I know myself, I need to push myself sometimes even more than
And
I would feel comfortable.
so I'm going to add 2 comments, and then I'm going to add a literature piece to tie this in for those of you who are looking at administrators and wondering where this goes in when you need to add proof, right? Okay, so first, Joseph is like, this, let's see, this might really also encourage them to be on time as well. They
Yes.
won't be late for class, might even put some prep in their step, pep in their step while getting ready. I think so.
Yes. And those kids
Absolutely.
that I sadly was in a Title I school for a while. That it's not sad that I was in a Title I school, but the fact that the kids hated coming to school, that was what was sad. They would
Yeah.
come kicking and screaming and crying. And I've done a lot of
Oh,
thinking about all the kids that I've seen in my career. And I've often thought that that would have been the best place for something like that, because they
yeah.
wouldn't feel like they would be excited to come. And these were little ones, like these were little people that were
No.
really struggling with wanting to get up and come to school. And
Gosh.
anything that we can do to get them excited. That's when I actually was first a media specialist. And my whole goal for creating a makerspace in my media center was because I wanted those kids who hated school, who hated reading, who hated learning, to want to be there. I put aside any academic goals that I had for them. And I thought, what I care about is that they want to be here, that they feel loved, that they're excited, that they see something different. It feels magical for them. I redid that whole media center. I decorated it like crazy. I had Spider-Man hanging from the ceiling and all kinds of things because I wanted them to be there. And then they wanted to come. And I knew if I could just get them in the door, that I could get them excited about reading and about thinking. And so that was the thing. That was the thing that I held on to. And it
Yes.
worked.
And,
So,
it's so, 2 things I want to kind of just add to that too. For those of you who are like, well, how do I tell my administrator about choice and things like this? There is a body of research in motivation under what's called self-determination theory. Self-determination theory. It's by DC and Ryan. I don't remember their first names, but self-determination theory talks about how do we create an environment that encourages internal motivation. Exactly what Trina was saying. How do we get these kids internally motivated who want to be in school? And one of the keys to that is, thank you, Joseph, for writing that in the chat. Self-determination theory says that there are 3 basic things that all humans need in order to help with internal motivation. One is being autonomous, having choices, and not feeling controlled. And there's the nice thing I like about self-determination theory is it will also tell you what is amotivating, what kills motivation. Control and telling kids what to do, what to create, what to say, what to think is one of the big reasons why kids aren't motivated in school.
yeah.
There's no control. The other reason, the other piece is belonging. Trina, you like just totally hit the nail on the head. A safe space where kids feel that they belong, that they're cared for, that they're being listened to and recognized and heard is another really big piece of the self-determination theory. So you've got choices and autonomy, giving kids the feeling of being autonomous. I mean, think about ourselves, right? This is a human psychological theory. It talks about like when I'm controlled, I'm like, yeah, forget that, right? Like you don't want to do it. So,
You rebel.
what's that?
I said you rebel.
You rebel,
Yeah.
right? You resist. So
Mhm.
giving them choices, having them feel like they belong, that they're safe, that they're loved, they're cared for. This is the other piece. And then the third piece is competency. And competency, again, it works 2 ways. Competency is It's the equivalent. I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with Bandura's self-efficacy theory. Competency is Bandura's self-efficacy theory. Do I have the confidence to know I can make it, that I have the competence, the skills, the things to be able to do this thing, to accomplish this thing, right? If you don't feel confident enough to do it, you won't.
Yeah.
This is like the driving. If you put somebody behind the wheel, right? Yes. And they think that they're going to die, they're not going to drive.
They're not going to, no, they're not going to drive. They're not even going to attempt to do it because the fear is so large that no, you're right. That's so true.
And that competency comes from also having opportunities to feel competent. So a makerspace, when you tell kids you have 15 minutes to make a thing and they made it and they show it, it gives them the confidence to be like, I'm competent. Mm-hmm. I can do this.
You can do it.
Mm-hmm. And Joseph is putting a bunch of like SDT stuff in the chat right now. So thank you for that. But, but this is definitely one of those things where if you're like, how do I justify this in my classroom? One of them is self-determination theory. Makerspaces and self-determination theory really align together to say, this is how we get kids motivated. This is how we can get them to, just like Joe said, to school on time, to want to go to school. But it's the SEL pieces that you were talking about too, Trina. I didn't mean to take over the chat. I just thought
I think that's great. I think that's great.
Oh, Joseph, this is great. Put it in the chat so people can use it. So I appreciate it. Sorry. He's like, so hope I'm not flooding the chat. This is fantastic. So great. Yeah, so that's, because we often talk about like, and then BB was like summer reading, right? And this is self-determination theory. There's a lot. It goes in all kinds of fields. It's internationally known, but it is also really well used in education. So you can find a whole lot of literature on that. Other recommendations for summer reading, Trina, for Makerspaces and SEL?
Well, I actually have some trainings, but if you're talking about your BB is my BB, then she's done this, but I think they might be the same person. But
she is the same person. I love her. Yeah. She's a Fierce and Fearless this year too. So this is pretty
that's exciting. She's great. She's exciting. She inspires me. So anyway, yes, I have some little trainings that I'm going to be doing for free in my Facebook group, my Makerspace Thinking and Learning Facebook group. I'm having some Facebook issues with, I've shown up for 2 weeks in a row we were talking about using podcasting as an alternative form of assessment or a different way for kids to show what they know today. And then last week we talked about specifically podcasts for kids. And then next week we start on a Makerspace, little role of Makerspace informational little trainings. So that is available if anyone's
interested in that. They join your group, and I will put this in the chat so people have it. So Joseph, please share this with your teacher friends. Absolutely. And anybody who's watching this, if you feel that this is useful. Makerspaces, by the way, are not just for elementary.
No,
right? Like you could have these in your library, because I know there's a number of you that are librarians. You can have this, even at the high school. They're very, very successsul.
There's a lot of famous ones in museums. So more and more like places are doing it. And I've always, like, I have yet to go to like a really big one and see what it looks like from that scale, but I would love to. I think that would be so fun.
Oh my gosh, that would be epic. So Trina, when they take your training, what is it that they're going to learn, like from these free trainings that you have in your group?
From the free trainings, we'll talk about how to start a makerspace. We'll talk about how to get ideas for it, how to start collecting materials. And I do think I have on the schedule to talk a little bit about social and emotional learning in one of the trainings. So yeah. And then I have a master class about every classroom needs a makerspace. That's coming as well in July. So yeah.
Yeah. And then Joseph is asking here, how would a makerspace work if in a high school, instead of a single teacher implementing it, it could be in a library. Like there's a lot of places, there's a lot of schools actually where they have a side makerspace in the library. It could be like, oftentimes there's study periods. And so they could go to the library and then they could use the makerspace there. There are now classes where people take classes in makerspaces. And I'm talking about like, Trina's talking about like, there's a whole gamut of different kinds of maker spaces,
Yes.
you
With
know, and
robotics and electronics, with using technology,
3D
allowing
printing.
3D printing, allow, coding. It doesn't have to be just toilet paper rolls and things like that. It can get more advanced. It doesn't have to. I think sometimes that scares people. And so they hear that and they go, oh, I don't have a 3D printer, or I don't have circuits, or I don't have odds bots or whatever. And you don't have to have that, but you also can have that. I think taking things apart and seeing how they work is such an interesting thing to people at all
Yes.
ages. I don't think that's just a, elementary thing. I
And
think,
they even have like community maker spaces,
yes,
you know.
yes, because that's really the point, is working
Yeah.
collaboratively. I mean, it's one of the huge keys. And I think it's an important aspect of Makerspace. I sometimes feel like I want to caution people, because it doesn't always have to be collaborative. I think there are people, introverts, that prefer to, like, every once in a while work alone. And
Mhm.
I'm always okay with that. I want a balance. I want them to push themselves in that aspect, because I have to push myself too. But I also think that it's important, that they learn to work things out with others as well,
Yes.
because that's
And
life.
oh gosh. And BB says, I visited a university that has a classroom devoted to makerspace. Loved it.
Yes.
And Danielle says here, spot on. There is no correct way to do makerspace. Absolutely. So and it's more, to me, I think, and Trina, please correct me if I'm wrong. Makerspace is like a space for that creativity and innovation. That's the point of a makerspace.
Yes. It's the mindset. It's not
Yeah.
specifically the materials or the tools or even the space. It really is about the mindset. So I think that's a huge takeaway.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. So we've got a few minutes left. Any other words or things that you want to share?
No, I did think for a second that as far as you couldn't even include tools, like that can be
Oh
woodworking
yeah.
and things like that. And the reason that came to my mind was because, I mean, I didn't even realize that about myself as a maker. I was joking with Yen in the beginning that I had my own personal makerspace in my garage, which I really honestly do. And I mean, I started collecting a variety of saws, and I have a nail gun and like all these different things, and I have been building and shiplapping. And it's it allows you sometimes if I do that enough, it gives me the opportunity to free up some brain space, and then I can't wait to jump back into something that's more rigorous as far as thinking goes. And so sometimes I think we need to look at it that way too. Like when we give our kids the opportunity to be creative, to think about things in a different way, it does free them up to do some of those other things that we want them to do, or feel like that they have to do.
Yeah. And it's it's almost an exercise.
Yes. Yes,
Like,
like practicing yoga. Yes,
yeah,
it really is. Yes.
and they need it. Like they need
Mhm.
to, and I mean, I'm sure all of us as educators, we've seen that moment when kids get so focused on things, right? And they're just completely driven, and you see it, like you can feel the energy that emanates from that. And I think we need more opportunities,
Yes.
where they get in that zone. Because
Yes.
that's that, right? Like it's like,
Yes, no, it's like time stands still. You don't even
yes,
realize how much time you've spent on something, because you're so in your moment, in your element, where you have found the thing that you are so passionate about, and then you also are good at it, or like feel like you are good at it. It really is like finding your element.
yeah. And Danielle says here, if it doesn't work, reiterate and tweak it until it works. That's
Yeah.
the other thing too. So that's, I would say, one of the things, like you can have kids create their own thing. You've got challenges, but at some point too, it's important to allow kids, not only allow them, but to expect them
Mhm.
to rebuild and make better. Like this is, again, the theory part, the learning theorist part in me. It's like, we don't give kids enough time to reflect and to improve. And so if we don't give them opportunities to do that, when they're out in the world and they hit these situations, how are they going to reflect and improve? How are they going to learn resilience and getting back up again, but doing it in a way where they're not making those same mistakes, right? It's,
No, it's important. It is.
Yeah.
I can't remember who I talked to about this. I don't know if it was you or if it was Vivify STEM, but we talked about reversing, like making the failure the goal. Was that you?
Oh, I
I
think
think
it
that
was
is,
Vivify STEM
and
that
they
talked
say
about
it's
the
not
failure.
them. So I'm like, I don't know. But anyway, so it was a conversation that I had with an imaginary person. And
But it was a
and
good one.
it was a good one. It was so good. And it was talking about taking failure and making that the goal. So for example, and this is when I was working with some fifth graders again,
Yeah.
they had a challenge. They like things kept going wrong. And then I said to one of them, I'm like, I go, so what did you learn from this failure? And first of all, they're like, oh, failure. Like they thought it was the worst thing that I could have ever said. So we had a great conversation about that. But then I made the failure the goal. Like, okay,
I
well,
love it.
yes. And so they had to like, they're like, so one of the teams is like, oh yes, we know what to do, because they all of a sudden felt successful because they had the exact answer to how to get that object or that, thing to not work, or to break or to do whatever. They had
Wow.
the answer. Yeah. So then the failure, and then that gives everybody a chance to feel that feeling of success and also to feel that feeling of struggle. Like,
Yeah.
wait a minute, I thought I had it figured out. And now guess what? You don't have it figured out, because now now we've flipped it. And now the failure becomes the goal. And so I think that that can be really powerful, because I think it's important
Yeah.
for us to feel all the feelings.
Yeah. And it's also an important skill, right? Like,
Yes.
one of the things I've learned is when I was in my business accelerator program, there were people that manufactured and designed things. And what's interesting is just because you have a solution, that's not the thing. And
Mhm.
this is with engineering too. Once you create it, you have to throw things at it until it breaks, right? Like my cousin works for UL. You know how like a lot of things you flip them underneath like the telephones and stuff, and there's a UL approved. And it's
Oh, mhm.
because, right, like it's because they take products and they run them through all of these rigorous tests. Like, they'll take a phone and they'll just slam it so many times until they actually have the number of when it breaks.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's an important, like UL has this certification so that it's a safety rating, right? It says, well, here's the parameters for it being safe until it breaks.
Mhm.
And I think that's also important. Like we need to break things.
Yes.
We need to know when things break. We need to know, you're right. Like, I love that. Like, where is the failure point? At what point will this fail?
Yeah.
Because, I mean, we want to know that for our cars, don't we?
Yes. Absolutely. Yes, absolutely.
Right? When it comes to like our hiking gear,
Yes.
say, you have a manufacturer and they've never tested the equipment.
Yes. Or your medical equipment. I mean,
Or
all
your
these,
medical,
yes, these are things you want to know. You want to know when you've reached failure.
when
Or
you reach
yes. Like it makes me think of the laminator where it has this red thing and it's like, do not go beyond this point or it will go back up into itself and burn up. And how many times people have pushed past that line. Let me just see if I can get a little bit more lamination. So
and I mean, but that's the process. Like Danielle's saying here, everything is a process. And Joe he's like, welcome back, Joe. But like, it's true. It's the process. And I think what I think is nice about Makerspaces is it's education according to human nature.
Yeah.
It suits our very nature. We test things, we press the red buttons.
Yeah.
Yes,
you're right. Yes, we do. And that's okay. That's just how we learn things. That makes
yes.
Yeah. My mom had one of those watches. It was like a cuff and he's like bending it and he breaks. And my mom's like, what are you doing? And I just wanted to see when it would break. He was so interested in how far can I wish it back. But then once it's broken, you're like, well, I think you broke it.
Yeah.
I think that's important because you're figuring out a lot when you're doing that, when you're pushing the boundaries like that.
Yes. And Danielle's like, I press all kinds of red buttons. And you know what it is too? I think this is part of it as I'm just thinking about this in our conversation. When we press those buttons, it brings us joy. Mm-hmm. Like when we test things and we are doing things that align to our nature, our very nature, that satisfies our curiosity, it's such a satisfying feeling.
Yeah.
Danielle's like, lots of students are told not to press the red button. Some kids need that.
Yeah.
I think I haven't met a kid who wouldn't want to press a red button
Yes.
at some point, depending on what the button is.
Yeah.
But it's our very nature to be able to do these things and to test things and to break things and stuff. And why can't we align education to human nature? Why can't we align teaching to our human nature? Because if we did, it would be so much easier for everybody.
It would be
So
magical.
yeah, and I think that's why I love Makerspaces so much. And I'm so glad that you came, because I really do think that Makerspaces are magical.
Yeah.
And Joe says here, when I was a kid, I had my favorite video Game Boy, Game Boy, and I wanted to see if I could actually damage the glass on the Game Boy, even though I didn't want to break it. I really wanted to know what would happen. I was 9. So I scratched the screen and then was really sad when I damaged it, but I really wanted to know what would happen.
Yes.
Like, that's right, human nature. And coming back, like, a makerspace, by the way, can also be collecting broken things and then having kids safely dismantle them.
Yeah. Taking things apart, for sure. Yes.
Yeah, like taking things apart is also a great thing that comes with human nature. I remember when I hid in my parents' closet because I took apart their alarm clock. And I knew I wasn't supposed to, but I did it anyway. And then I put it together. It was still broken, but my parents never found out. Now that this is on my public profile, they may know. But like, we do these things. And then Danielle's like, but you did learn something. So yes, we learn these things. This is how we learn, is we, make things and we break things. And yeah, it's great.
And I think sometimes it's important for us to know that we can't ruin it either. Like, sometimes, like, I feel that way with technology, with adults more than I do with kids, where they like, you just have to sometimes try things and take risks and be brave and take some chances. I think that's important for kids to learn as well.
Yeah. And they get the opportunity to, like, they get a chance to, in a parking lot, not on a busy highway.
Not on a busy highway.
Yes. Well, thank you so much, Trina, for joining us. Like, really. And then just to reiterate, I will have her link to her Makerspace group in our Facebook Live description. I'll go back and edit it so you have that. But you said these are weekly?
Yes.
Trainings?
Monday mornings. And then Monday mornings at 10:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, but then they're available for replay.
There you go. So highly suggest it. And you know what? For those of you who are parents and guardians out there, why not create a makerspace in your garage or something for your kids too, right? This is a great place for them to learn and engage. So not just for schools, but for everybody.
Absolutely not. That's a great idea.
Yeah. So thank you so much. I hope that you will join Trina on, her Mondays as she goes through Makerspaces. Trina, again, so thankful to have you. And thank you for all of that information. So, and then Joseph says here, I'm sorry, I missed that. What is it that happens on Monday mornings? You want to say it one more time?
Yes, they're like little brief trainings, about 15 minutes or so and we're starting a Makerspace series actually next week on Monday, and we'll be talking about, what it is and how to start it and ideas for it and how to gather materials and things like that. So that's the series we're going on pretty much through all the summer until the very last week. I think we're talking about community building in your classroom.
Thank you, everybody, for joining me. And thank you for all the questions. One more, because I just don't want Jennifer to feel left out here. We learned this way. I let my kid smash his RC car to bits because he wanted to try it. Yes.
I love that. I went to a smash room this year it was awesome. It was so great. Yes. And I used to do that with my kids as a student support specialist. I found a place in the back of the school that has like this cement wall that was like 3-sided, and we would throw rocks, and talk about like when you can't deal with your anger, it's so helpful. It's great. I love it.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank
if you have
you.
any questions, you can tag Trina or join her group and ask her questions in there too. Thanks again. Have a wonderful rest of your week.
Bye-bye.
Bye.